Друзья, приветствую всех. Дарья Счастливая. У меня в гостях
Hello, dear
известный
friends.
историк
I
Юрий
am Dasha
Фельштинский, доктор
Счастливая.
исторических наук.
My
Юрий
guest is
Георгиевич,
famous
приветствую вас.
historian Yuri
Добрый день,
Felshtinsky,
здравствуйте.
PhD in
Юрий
history.
Георгиевич, вы знаете,
Hello,
смотрела
Yuri.
все ваши
Hello.
последние интервью с Марком
Yuri,
Фейгиным.
I've
Вы
watched
обсуждали, кто может занять
your
место
latest
Путина. И
interviews with Mark
фактически вы
Fagin
говорите о том,
and many
что
others,
КГБ, ну уже
and
фСБ,
you were discussing
Патрушев
who is
в
going to
какое-то
replace
период времени
Putin
приняли
and
решение,
KGB,
что Путин
aka
должен уйти,
FSB.
и они
Patrushev,
распланировали эту
they made a
спецоперацию
decision that at
вместе
some
с
point Putin will have to
главой ЧВК
go, and
Вагнер
they planned this
Пригожиным, но
special
что-то потом
operation
поменялось, и
together
Путин
with
был вынужден
Prigozhin, the head
договариваться с
of the private
КГБ,
military
оно же
company,
ФСБ.
this mutiny,
Как вы
and
видите
then
ситуацию в целом
Putin had
сейчас?
to
Кто
make
может занять
an
место Путина,
agreement
когда это
with
может произойти?
FSB.
И почему, как вы
So
считаете,
how the
Пригожин
situation looks
не
now,
дошел
who will
до
replace
Киева?
Putin, and
Ну,
how it's
Пригожин
going
не
to look right
дошел до
now,
Кремля,
and
на
why
это
Prigozhin
вопрос
didn't make it to the
шел,
Kremlin.
потому
Well,
что
it's very
ему
easy to answer the question why Prigozhin didn't get to the Kremlin.
тот момент, да,
He
даже
didn't
скорее не
do it
Пригожин, а
because he got a
Bolsheviks,
different
который
instructions,
шел
different order,
на
but even
Москву.
not Prigozhin, but
Но
the leader
я
of the troops of that
рассматриваю
private military company, Utkin.
вагнеровцев, весь проект Вагнер, да,
I
как
consider
проект
the Wagner
безопасности. Я
project
рассматриваю
as the
Пригожина
project of
как
the
агента
State Security
госбезопасности. И,
Agency and
соответственно,
Prigozhin as an agent of the State
эти
Security
люди, ну,
Agency.
выполняют указания. Те указания,
And these
которые
people, they
им
just follow
дают.
orders.
Сказали
The orders that they are
воевать в
given.
Сирии, воюют в Сирии, сказали
They told them to fight in
организовывать
Syria, so they
какие-то
fought in
диверсии
Syria.
или перевороты
They
и
told
бизнесом
them
заниматься в Африке,
to
занимались
organize
бизнесом в
terrorist
Африке.
attacks in Africa, and
Госбезопасность
they did
всегда
that,
создавала параллельные
and
структуры.
they ran
Это
businesses there.
просто, ну, как бы немного
State
написано,
security services, they
немногие
always
об этом
created this
знают, это
parallel
не на
organization,
слуху,
so to
но
speak.
во времена
Not many
КГБ
people
тоже
talk
были
about it, not
параллельные
a lot
структуры.
written about it.
Может быть, не
But during
такие
the KGB
откровенные,
time,
как
there were some
проект
parallel
Вагнер, но они были,
organizations,
да,
not
поэтому
as
в том,
open
что
as this Wagner
госбезопасность создает
military company.
в формате
But it's
Вагнера
not a secret that the
частной
State Security
военной компании
Agency
какую-то параллельную структуру,
creates private
которая
military
вроде бы не
companies
имеет отношения к
like
государству.
Wagner Group,
Это
as if it's not a
вещь
part of the state.
понятная и ожидаемая. Как мы знаем,
And
теперь
clearly
с
why they do that, and it's quite expected. And as we know, according to Putin, the Wagner company was funded from the national budget, and billions of rubles were invested in this organization, quite a serious budget. And clearly somebody should be backing this organization. And again, clearly it's impossible that if ex-prisoner Prigozhin is the only organizer and coordinator of such an organization. It's impossible. And prisoner Prigozhin cannot be the cook of Putin if he's not a part of the State Security Agency. So these are really ABCs. It is so clear that there is nothing to discuss. It can't be any other way. And as we know, the Wagner company is not part of the Ministry of Defense. And the conflict, the external conflict, happened because Putin decided to put the private military company under the Ministry of Defense. That the company would be controlled by Shoigu, the Minister of Defense. And that's why there was a conflict between Putin and the State Security Agency. And we know that because in negotiations between Putin and Lukashenko, as if Putin was negotiating with Prigozhin, there was Patrushev participated in this, the secretary of the Security Council. And actually it turns out that it was the negotiations between Putin and Patrushev. And Prigozhin really had nothing to talk about with Putin. And we know that Putin actually ran away from Moscow. And there was this message in Twitter, and somebody said that Utkin and Prigozhin company is going to Moscow, and Putin fled Moscow. And he did that not because there was any danger from the private military company. Putin knew that he is about to be dethroned, and this is what Medvedev said when he came back to Moscow, the ex-president. He said that that was an attempt to take over the power. And we know it didn't happen on the side of the Ministry of Defense or a Russian guard. And there is no any other power in Russia but FSB, so we can say that that was the Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation, the organization that appointed Putin as a president, and he coexisted with this organization all these years, until there was this conflict. And this conflict kind of popped up on the surface on the 24th of June, and initially it started because Putin realized that there is a threat from FSB, and he decided to weaken FSB, moving the Wagner company under the control of the Minister of Defense, under Minister of Defense Shoigu. That's why this conflict between Prigozhin and Shoigu, which we thought was a conflict of two military leaders. Prigozhin is a leader of the Wagner group, and Shoigu is the head of the Minister of Defense. But in fact, it was a conflict, interagency conflict. Firstly, because some of the troops of Wagner were moved under the control of the Ministry of Defense, and secondly, because of the funds, because of the budget. Because in this case, Prigozhin and FSB, they would be losing these funds that were used to finance the Wagner group, and as we know, this budget is pretty big. As a result, Putin returned to Moscow after the mutiny. He is president again, and we know that, but we don't know what were the conditions under which he returned to Moscow. What concessions he made, we also don't know. But because that long day of June 24th, when Putin was not in Moscow, and we know that nobody stood up for him, nobody, at any level, and we can assume that the collective leadership of Russia, personified by different people who are related to this leadership, they were understanding that Putin's days are counting. So how long, how many days, that's a big question. Gorbachev left, resigned in December, yet the coup happened in August. Yeltsin resigned on the 31st of December, before his term, just like Gorbachev. So that's why we may expect that the agreement that Putin made is that Putin will voluntarily resign. The only issue is that in Putin's case, there is an arrest warrant of the International Criminal Court, which means that after he resigns, nobody will be able to protect him from this warrant. And since he does not trust his own colleagues in FSB, and he understands that if circumstances require, they will give him away, dead or alive, to the Hague Tribunal. So clearly this is for him an additional incentive not to resign and to stay as long as possible in power. To answer the question who will replace Putin and when, before 23rd of June I was absolutely sure that Putin, first of all, will run for the president and in 2024, and he will win, no doubt about that. Right now, I'm not sure about either one. And I wouldn't exclude that he, as Gorbachev and Yeltsin, he will resign before his term because of his health, and he might die, by the way. Anything can happen. People are mortal, right? I don't know who will replace Putin, and now everybody is discussing that it can be Bortnikov, head of FSB, or Patrushev, secretary of the Security Council. I don't know who this person could be, but I know that FSB will never give up the power. They've been keeping this power for 23 years, since 2000, And of course, they have no intentions to give it up. But how they will keep the power, through whom and who will be this, so to speak, candidate. Of course, I won't be surprised that there will be just a person from the State Security Agency. I won't be surprised that this will be the tradition they're trying to create, so that the president of Russia is a person from the state security agencies, maybe even a former head of FSB, ex-FSB director, became the president before as Putin, and now Bortnikov can be the one as a former head of FSB. When I was preparing for interview with you, and I watched a lot of Sergey Pugachyov interviews, he's a former friend of Putin, and he said that Putin is a person from FSB and he came in power, and why not now another KGB person would come to power? So you agree with that, right? Yes, I agree. Sergey Zhirnov, ex-spy, told me that he has a theory that many years ago Putin was replaced with a double, and do you agree with this theory? No, of course not. I disagree with this. Quite often, with great interest, I watch Zhirnov's videos, and it doesn't mean that he is always right. And he made an assumption that Prigozhin was killed after 24th of June, but as we know, Prigozhin wasn't killed, he's alive. Well, about Prigozhin, Sergey Zhirnov, yesterday in his interview, he told me that that was so-called canned footage. These photographs, these videos and audios that we saw after Prigozhin's mutiny, according to Sergey Zhirnov, this is all this like canned information. So I don't know that. Maybe you have a better idea. Maybe that's what Zhirnov thinks, or Christo Groziev says that Prigozhin might become a president. Maybe Prigozhin was killed, and what they show us, these are this canned footage. This is Sergey Zhirnov's theory. Well, it doesn't mean it's impossible. Of course, anything is possible. Possibility that Prigozhin was killed and now you can see some photoshopped footage or like archived videos and all that. Yes, I understand, but all of them, they could be refined and kind of corrected and adjusted and then shown to the public. Theoretically speaking, it's possible, but I don't quite believe that. I don't quite understand what's the need for it. And of course, I don't believe the version about the doubles. It doesn't mean that there are no people whom they put in a second or the third car so that people would know in which car Putin is. But that's really a matter of security. They may do that, but a version of a functioning double who really replaces Putin and plays the role of the president, of course, I don't quite believe that. And of course, I absolutely don't believe this theory that Prigozhin may become president, even as being part of FSB. There are some sort of institutional principles, so to speak. There is nobody who would be backing Prigozhin. Yes, of course, he was recruited by the State Security Agency when he was still in prison. It was easier for him to survive in prison. But then the same State Security Agency helped him to start quite successful business, while besides he had these connections in the criminal world. And back in 1990s, it helped him a lot. But you see, you wouldn't be able to approach the president of Russia if you were not vetted by the State Security Agency. So that's just impossible. And I don't think that with such a background as Prigozhin had, because he did time for robbery, I think about 10 years he was in prison, so, and he can become a president. It's not that people wouldn't elect you, wouldn't vote for you, because this is the voters who decide who president will be in this computer, this voting computer. And this computer is owned by the State Security Agency, according to the Russian state, and FSB does the counting. And according to the Russian law, it is possible to do remote voting, which means that if they have a candidate that they want to win, then they can just add as many votes as they need through this computer system. So clearly, who will choose the next president, and FSB will choose that president, and whom they choose, the opinions can be different, but my opinion is that they won't give up the power. And why would they do it? Because from the institutional point of view, everything is okay. They're controlling a huge country, they're huge funds. This is all that is under their control. They might make this nuclear disaster, and now it's a possibility, but before the war in Ukraine, everybody was talking to them, and because they were running this great power, and everybody talked to them, so why not? So why would they change this rosy situation for themselves and to give the power to somebody else? I don't think they will do that.
Юрий Георгиевич, а как вы вообще относитесь к таким достаточно длинным, очень откровенным интервью, которые дает Сергей Пугачев?
Yuri, and what about your view on these interviews of Sergey Pugachyov, these long interviews? And do you agree with the psychological portrait of Putin that he kind of draws, and saying that Putin is a sadist and all the decisions are made by this group of people, Kovalchuks, Rottenbergs and others? So do you think it's conspiracy? And how far is it from the truth? Well, I wouldn't say it's conspiracy. I would say this: any person that was close at some point to Putin, and naturally a person may think that they understand Putin better than anybody else. And from a psychological point of view, that's okay. So any smart person, and Pugachev is a smart person, he thinks that he knows Putin better, and he knows more than anybody else. It is a fact that there are many dark spots in Putin's biography, and domestic violence, beating his wife. I don't think that's the greatest discrediting information about Putin. I think there are probably worse things. The thing that main advisors to Putin at the point when he has to make principal decisions, particularly including foreign policy decisions, and these people are Patrushev and Bortnikov, and we know that based on what Putin said. Because Putin said how he made a decision to invade Ukraine in 2014, and the same type of decision was made in 2022. This decision was made by 5 people: Putin, Patrushev, Bortnikov, Shoigu, and Gerasimov, the head of staff. Because he said these names, but Shoigu and Gerasimov, they're kind of technical people. They have no voting right. Because Shoigu, the Minister of Defense, he is Putin's guy. He is completely created by Putin, so that Putin would have an obedient guy in the post of Minister of Defense. Gerasimov, the head of staff, the head of general staff. We know quite an interesting story that the general staff of the Soviet army was absolutely against invasion of Afghanistan. Nevertheless, this invasion happened because the Communist Political Bureau made the decision to invade Afghanistan influenced by KGB, and they decided to replace the government of Afghanistan back then. So I don't know how Gerasimov voted at that point. Was he voting for or against the invasion? I don't know if he had any arguments against the invasion. He might have thought that the Russian army wouldn't be able to accomplish the mission. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But as we know, based on what we know about the invasion to Afghanistan, his vote didn't have much weight. That's why we say that three people made this decision: Putin, Patrushev, and Bortnikov. And I think it would be the right assumption that these three people, this triumvirate, really runs Russia. Behind this triumvirate, there is a very serious body, and it doesn't like to speak about itself or publicize itself. They don't publish any documents or make any political announcements. It's called the College of FSB. It was created back in 1918 by Felix Dzerzhinsky. This organization has been around for all its time. In the Communist Party, there was this Politburo that was running the Communist Party and the country. In this case, this is College of FSB that also runs the agency, and I suppose that they run the country as well, together with Bortnikov, Patrushev, and Putin. So therefore, I think this is how the ruling is done. I've heard that people talk about it a lot and write about it a lot. I don't really believe that the governance of the state has to do something with the family of Kovalchuks or Rotenbergs. I don't know. It's not a matter of whether they want or they don't run the state, but it's just because they're not from the structures, these security structures, so to speak. They came in power from aside, through businesses, through their personal connections with Putin, and these are personal ties, so to speak. They are not ties on the level of agencies, but running the country is based on the agency ties, and because the country is run by the corporation of FSB officers. So in other words, when the decision will be made for Putin to leave, this decision will be done by the College of FSB, right? Yes, I think so. Yuri, in one of your interviews you said that the war can be finished within 2 weeks. And you said it's possible if they consider it reasonable to launch strikes on Moscow, but quite powerful ones, not the ones done with the drones, which are kind of cosmetic. Could you confirm that? Well, strikes on Moscow, this is the third point of the program to finish the war within 2 weeks. And of course, in this sense, it is not 2 weeks. Well, first of all, Western allies of Ukraine, they should provide Ukraine with offensive types of weapons, including long-range missiles. This is the first point for the victory in this war. The second condition: the allies must remove restrictions to use these weapons against Russia, against Russian territory, including Moscow. And the third point, which is very important, this is liberation of Belarus, liberation from the Russian occupation. But this can happen only before or after the victory. But I think yes, if the allies give Ukraine offensive types of weapons, and Ukraine starts hitting Russia and hitting Moscow, which is very important. And it's not important because it's a big city. No, not because of that. It's because Russia is organized in such a way that Russia is a country of one city. And everything that's happening beyond Moscow, nobody cares about it in Russia. Maybe kind of abstractly, some people are interested in that, but it doesn't mean that it has to do something with governing the states, that it has to do with the control over the state. Nobody is interested in all these suburbs, in these provincial towns. All the successful, important, rich people live in Moscow. From the point of view of Muscovites, those who don't live in Moscow, those are failures, and they shouldn't be even accounted for. So that's why Moscow is a special city. And I don't think that there are such arrangements in the world. I mean, there are not many examples like that, that when one city kind of determines the life of the whole country. But in Moscow, Muscovites, they don't feel the war. You can't see, you can't hear the war in Moscow. Even now, when the drones come from God knows where, and they break glass in some of the buildings in Moscow. Of course, we're not talking about such type of strikes. Of course, when we talk about strikes, we're talking about the strikes against strategic military facilities, and starting with Ostankino TV station, TV tower, Lubyanka, FSB office, Ministry of Defense, government building, the building of the foreign ministry. So these are the strikes we're talking about. So, Yuri, the UN, after the Moscow city was attacked, they publicly announced that they disagree with this, that they condemn this, but they kind of say that it's okay to bomb Ukraine, but the West is not ready that Moscow will be hit. This is how I see it, that the West is not ready to see Russia lose. The West still hopes that it will be possible to negotiate with Russia. Some of the diplomats say that it's possible to sit at the negotiation table with Putin. They don't want Russia to go to China. Somehow they want to restore the relationship with Russia. So everybody is afraid that Russia will lose, and they do everything so that Russia wouldn't lose. So do you agree with this statement? A lot from what you say actually is true. Yes, Western allies of Ukraine, they do everything that's necessary, let's be frank. They do everything so that Ukraine wouldn't lose this war, but they do nothing so that Ukraine win this war. And I think there are two reasons for that. On one hand, the West is very much afraid of provoking Russia for nuclear escalation. Nuclear strikes, that's the only thing that the West is afraid of, I mean from the military point of view, because the West doesn't want to broaden the front of this war going beyond Belarus and Russia, and let alone turning this war into a nuclear war. And at the same time, there is a certain number of politicians, and in each country there are such politicians, and all politicians are different, there are different points of view, and yes, many politicians think that it's very important that Russia wouldn't fall apart, so that instead of Russia they have this vacuum, this like empty spot. I have a different point of view. I see this threat differently. I don't think that there is any probability that Russia falls apart under any arrangement, under any
против Украины
situation in the
Россия не
front,
может распасться.
in
Я
the
считаю,
war,
что от России
Russia
будет
cannot fall apart.
но это во всех случаях произойдет, это только вопрос времени. Отделяться
And what is a matter of time, I think that Dagestan, Ingushetia, Chechen Republic, they may leave Russia. This is maximum that Russia may lose in terms of territories, but frankly speaking, it's not much, because Russia is a huge country. But to suspect that Russia will fall apart into like 20 independent states, it's impossible. There are no such examples in history, and I think that is impossible. These speculations, let me put it like this, it is more like a cover for those politicians who don't want Russia to lose in this war. That's why the argument they use goes like this. If Russia loses the war, then this huge part of land where Russia is, there will be total chaos, and it will be even more headache than they have today. No, it won't be. Because right now, Russia is in its climax of negativity. Like Hitler was the worst threat for the world. And all those arguments, supposed arguments, like let's not touch Hitler because somebody worse than Hitler might come. So these arguments back during the World War II wouldn't work. The same here. You can't look at Putin as if he's not the worst that may happen in Russian history. No, he is the worst that may happen to Russian history. Because he's an absolute, unprincipled villain who has nuclear weapons, and he's from KGB, and he's relying on KGB, so nobody can be worse than he is. He may be replaced by some other person, but it's not going to be worse. You still have the nuclear weapons, you will still have this issue there, will it be used or not? So that's why this is the greatest injustice that we have today, and this injustice can be easily explained. The war is going on in Ukrainian territory for 1.5 years, and Russia doesn't feel this war and doesn't suffer from this war, and until Russia feels the war and suffers from the war, Russia has no incentives. Say Russia, Russian people, Russian government has no incentives to finish the war, because from the point of view of Russia, they don't have the war. And see, they even prohibited to say the word war, because if there is war, then at some point you need to finish the war. But they formally don't even have the war. They have a military operation, and a military operation can be done for ages. And until they understand in Russia that it's not a special military operation, it's a war, and the war should be finished, because it's not beneficial to have this war, so nobody will finish the war. To feel this war in Russia, there must be strikes on Moscow, on Russia, because nobody cares about anything else but Moscow in Russia. Yuri, while we're talking, I pick at the news, and this is what I see. Recently, the head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Mr. Kuleba, he said that politically this fall will be very difficult, because our Western partners will be pushing us to negotiate with Russia. He said it a few days ago, and here's the news. Ukraine may get membership in NATO in exchange for territorial concessions to Russia. This is what Sten Jensen, director of the private office of NATO secretary, said.
В нашем Министерстве иностранных дел уже
In our
отклонили
Ministry of
это заявление,
Foreign
но,
Affairs,
Юрий Ильич,
they
они
said
прозвучали.
that it's a
Понимаете?
wrong
Они
statement.
прозвучали, они могут
So,
звучать
yet they made this statement.
много раз.
Well,
Кстати
they made
говоря,
this
будьте
statement,
справедливы, я и от некоторых
and they
украинских,
make such statements even more. And actually, let's be frank,
ну, граждан,
some of the Ukrainian
политиков
citizens and
такое,
analysts
такую как бы схему озвученную тоже слышал.
say
Я
such
не
things
считаю
too,
ее работающей.
but I don't think it may
То
work.
есть абстрактно говоря, может быть и
Abstractly
теоретически,
speaking,
да,
theoretically,
да, можно было бы
yes,
как-то там договориться, ну ладно,
we
вы
may say, well,
забирайте
maybe
это,
they
вы
can
дальше
negotiate
будете
something
жить
like,
в
okay,
мире и
you
дружбе.
take this and we will live
Применительно к
in
России
friendship.
это не работающая
But
схема.
applying to Russia, this
Это
scheme can
просто
work.
схема, которая работать не будет. Это
That's just not gonna
приглашение
work.
для новых конфликтов.
This is kind of an invitation for new
Во-первых,
conflicts.
во-первых, не примут Украину в НАТО.
First of all, Ukraine won't be accepted to NATO under such conditions.
Будут ли намеренно Украину вводить в заблуждение?
I don't think they will be intentionally mislead Ukraine, saying that if you agree to give up this, this, and that, then the rest of Ukraine will be a member of NATO. I don't think it may happen. It contradicts with the psychology of the Western world, so to speak. I think the latest meeting in Saudi Arabia, and I was quite skeptical about it, and I was right, because you can't expect that a two-day meeting where you have representatives of 50 countries with their very different plans and views of this war, you couldn't expect that they make some saving decision. I didn't expect that. But one breakthrough we witnessed, and I think it's a serious one, and if we focus on it, then we can realize how the situation can be developed and used in favor of Ukraine. Nevertheless, on all the sides, including China, we heard that Ukraine has the right to be independent. This is not what Putin started the war with. He said that Ukraine doesn't have the right to be independent, and he tried to push this agenda, to push this understanding of the current events. And he said that this special military operation, not war, this military actions against Ukraine, this is kind of an internal business of Russian Federation. It's like a big Chechen war. This is how he was trying to present it. Ukraine is a big Chechen republic. And nevertheless, after 1.5 years of the war, the world kind of agrees that Ukraine has the right for its independence. It is an independent state. There is only one little thing left: to return the borders of 1991. So Ukraine has the right for its independence in the borders of 1991. So, and under such conditions, we can have negotiations. Because if these negotiations are happening when we have points that are not agreed on, so these negotiations bring us nothing on either side. Ukraine, other countries, Russia. That's why I think that exchange of peace for territories, we can discuss it for as long as you want, it's not going to work. With Russia, this arrangement is just not workable. Theoretically, it might work if there were two small states the results of negotiations should be guaranteed by some great powers. So this could have been possible. But when one of the big powers snatches a piece of territory from its neighbor and then says, okay, give us this for now, and then we'll sign an agreement, so this arrangement is not going to work. It will bring us only to the point when Russia will regroup, will accumulate new army and start another war, as it happened in 2022, if we count it from 2014. It's very important to emphasize that Ukraine condemned this statement of the director of the private office of the NATO secretary. Finishing our interview, I would like to ask you two questions. Maria Maksakova, a famous video blogger, she said that Alina Kabaeva, Putin's lover or secret wife, this arrangement was organized by Alisher Usmanov, this Russian oligarch, and Marina Viner. They wanted Medvedev to be in power, that Putin wouldn't run for president anymore, and he will resign, and Medvedev would have been the president. That's what Maksakova says. It's kind of part of technology, organizing Alina Kabaeva for Putin. Sergey Zhirnov, ex-spy, says that Alina Kabaeva is kind of Putin's wallet, like others. It's more like a special operation of FSB, and they made up this project for the audience. And even I, when I asked the question about Alina Kabaeva, so I kind of play this game with them. And another thing is that Putin has a problem with his health, and all the newspapers of the world are talking about his health, but he actually is quite healthy, and it's another special operation. What do you say? On one hand, everybody is sick, everybody has problems with their health, but some people live long and some people live short. So how long Putin will live, nobody knows. And I think in general he's okay. And I wouldn't say there are hopes that he will leave due to health reasons. I have nothing about this project called Alina Kabaeva, but I know for sure that when they made a decision to elect Putin, and PR strategists, they were discussing how to do it, who chooses Putin, all these oligarchs, Berezovsky, Abramovich and others, and only later it was clear that FSB was behind this project and not Berezovsky or Abramovich. And Pugachev actually said that he made this decision. Yes, right. Yeah, but as I said, it's like about this story about the elephant, where the blind were touching different parts of the elephant and then describing the elephant based on the parts. But what I'm saying, I know for sure that there was a project to divorce Putin with his wife Ludmila, and to bring him a different wife from the PR point of view. And the PR strategists, they were discussing that from the point of view of PR, how to show them to the public, it would be better if his wife was not Ludmila Putina, but some other woman. So that's why I wouldn't be surprised with this approach. And it's quite possible that some proactive people brought him this beautiful girl, and they got closer to Putin. And there were people, And I know that some of them, and some people thought that Medvedev, he's our everything. It's like Medvedev comes, he will stay for the second term, and we'll have a different guy for the president, not Putin, but Medvedev. But let's be frank, that was quite a naive take on what's going on in Russia. Medvedev was so not independent, and he was so under the influence of Putin, and he exists only because he has personal ties with Putin, and just the idea to suppose that Medvedev may stay as a president, so these people just didn't understand a thing about what's going on in Russia. Yuri, thank you very much for such an interesting talk. So please like this video, write the comment. So please subscribe to the channel, Dasha Счастливая, and so you can click on it. So my guest was Yuri Felshtinsky, famous historian, PhD in history. Yuri, thank you very much for finding time to be with us. Thank you.